Welcome everyone for those who are coming to the recording as well. So this is the beginning of my presentation. We have here a map from Kitchener to Waterloo, and I think this is a really good visual reminder that if you want the best route to get somewhere, the first thing you need to do is actually know where you're going. You need to know where you're going if you want to find the best route there. And the reason I say that is we are going to talk about strategy and structure near the end of this presentation, but I think we need to start with our goals. What are our internal and external goals as a group? Admittedly, we are building this ship while we're sailing on it. There seems to be some evidence that construction has already happening on protected Greenbelt lands. And so us as a group said, we need to start running. We need to start gathering groups of people together, even though we really don't have organizational structure built. This is something that we're going to be building. And hopefully out of today, we have a clear sense of what kind of structure we need. So today I want to talk about external and internal goals for our Greenbelt Guardians movement. So just a couple of definitions and examples of what do I mean by external and internal goals. So the external goal is simply the ultimate mission or goal of our Greenbelt Guardians movement, which is to protect the land. To protect the land and other similar goals are why we exist, why we're here today, 169 people on this late night Tuesday Zoom call. That's the ultimate purpose of our work. Again, an example of an external goal is protecting Greenbelt land from development. So that's external to the movement, but we also have internal goals to the movement. And an example of this could be recruiting and training new volunteers for our surveillance work. So I'm using this language of external and internal goals because I think it's really important to distinguish between these two as we move forward and become very clear on what our multiple external goals are and what our multiple internal goals are. So just to give you some practical analogies to what I'm talking about, because this can seem perhaps abstract still, I want you to imagine yourself at work. You might have an external an external goal of getting more work done. So you have a long to-do list and you want to get as much of it done well as possible. And to help you achieve this external goal, you have an internal goal of organizing your workspace. For example, I've been experimenting at my work how to organize some of my work better. And organizing my work isn't the goal, but it's there to help me with my wider goal of doing, for example, some of my teaching work better than I have been. Or to use an athletics example, an athlete might have an external goal of winning a competition, and they achieve that external goal through some of their internal goals, which include eating healthy every day. So these are just two examples of external goals and internal goals. And here I'm applying it to our work as a movement, as a community in this surveillance work that we're talking about. So I want to start with external goals. What's the purpose of what we're trying to do with this surveillance? Obviously, it's to protect the land and to stop development that can be destructive on wetlands or other natural areas. But this isn't the only goal. Now, I want to defend this a little bit because obviously this is the most important goal. But what we're going to be doing as local groups and as a movement will have multiple effects. And if we're intentional about these multiple effects become goals. And I think it's wise to pay attention to what those goals might be so that we can do better at them. So obviously, protect the land and stop development is one of the first and most important goals of our movement. But another goal is to threaten Ford's legitimacy. If we're taking pictures and paying a lot of close attention to the type of unethical development that's going on in the Greenbelt, and we're posting this on social media, we're getting in the news, this is going to help threaten Ford's public opinion numbers, his legitimacy as both a good governor and like a democratically legitimate governor. And I think that's an important goal. Other goals include sustaining public attention. Us 168 people here, we're the people who pay close attention, but there's wide swaths of the public who, may have paid attention for 2 weeks in late November, early December, but as 2023 comes along, their attention is gonna go somewhere else. So part of what we're doing, one of our goals, is actually sustaining public attention. And a related goal is public education. A lot of these lands are not just beautiful. They're deeply valuable for a whole range of reasons, for other parts of nature and for humanity as well. And so part of what we're doing is contributing not only to sustaining public attention, but also raising levels of public awareness about the importance of this land and what this land means. One of our goals is also to multiply the number of people active. In the last month, the kind of public backlash against Bill 23 has shown there's a number of people who have not been awake to the value of this land, who are becoming awake. And one of our goals here is actually to invite those people who are suddenly aware into deeper engagement. And that's what I mean by multiply the number of people active. A sixth goal is to build relationships and skills. Many of us here come from many different areas and many different organizations. And part of what we're doing is actually building relationships with each other, learning who each other are, building trust, relationships that then will become valuable down the road in other ways as well. And we're also learning skill. We're learning, one of our goals, one of the effects of what we're doing will be skill building. We're all going to be learning a whole heck of a lot. And that should be kept in mind when we're thinking about how do we structure what we're doing here so that the skills that we're naturally going to learn anyways through experience become increased. And finally, this is important, empower people and fight despair. There is a lot of despair out there. And one of the things about action is the greatest antidote to despair. It is a recipe for hopefulness, and that in and of itself is a worthwhile goal to keep in mind. Anyway, so these are just 7 goals that basically came to me on the top of my head of what effects we would have as a movement. And so now I want to invite your participation. In the chat, I want you to think of answers to this question. What other possible goals might our Greenbelt Guardians movement help with? So just to be clear, the Greenbelt Guardians movement is this movement, the surveillance movement, right? That we were talking about earlier. What other possible goals could this movement help with? So feel free to put some of your thoughts in the chat. We'll give you about a minute to do this. Yeah, repealing the bill, truth and reconciliation, relationship with land, increasing democracy, engagement with Indigenous people, education, yeah. Challenging the legalities, protecting biodiversity, supporting other movements, slowing climate change. So many other possible goals that we're helping with, I can't even read them fast enough. These are all great ideas, thank you. Protecting water, yep. Helping get the other levels of government involved, sway councillors who haven't spoken out before about the need to speak out. These are all great. This is, people are talking about putting pressure on other institutions in society by this work. Building friendship, yep, the human connection piece. Well, thank you, everyone. My point in that was simply to show that although protecting the land is our primary goal here, there are other goals that we'll meet. And so when we're thinking about structure, when we're thinking about how to organize ourselves and what actions are strategic, we need to be thinking about how are our ways of organizing and how are our actions connected to these larger goals. So it's really important to keep these in mind. I'm just going to move on now, but thank you everyone for sharing, and sorry I wasn't able to read all of them with our 169 participants, so thank you. I did want to mention this because it's important. Success is a spectrum. And I think this is a really important caveat to keep in mind. There's a range of both probabilities of success and then a range of success after the fact. So we might have 8 or 9 primary goals, but the probability of success is different depending on the goal. And this is just an example. Like, these are numbers I came up with. These aren't like set in stone, but just as an example, for protecting the entire Greenbelt from development, we might have a low chance of success. Now, protecting parts of the Greenbelt or certain parts of pieces of land, we might have a higher chance of success. So too with our goals of public attention or education or threatening Ford's legitimacy. Each of these has a different range of probability of success. And so why is this important? It's important to name the probabilities may not be high to prepare ourselves for what we can and cannot do, especially to prepare ourselves that the odds may be against us for particular pieces of land. But probability is not the question. Worthiness of the fight is the question, worthiness of the struggle. Is this a worthy fight, even if a win may be improbable? I think it's a key question. And I mean, yes, I think it is. I think it's important to name if it's improbable, because that changes how we organize and how we strategize. But this is still a worthy fight. This quote from the Jewish philosopher Maimonides really speaks to me and to this situation. Hope is believing in the viability of the possible rather than the inevitability of the probable. So perhaps some of our goals, especially our land protection goals, perhaps it's true that success is improbable. But one of the things we are called to, that we are calling each other to, is the type of hope that sees there's possibility here. And I believe in the possibility. And I believe the possibility makes this worthwhile. And to quote another philosopher, Pete Seeger, it is better to have fought for the survival of the world and lost than never have fought at all. And from those kind of thoughts about hope and the worthwhile fights kind of thing, I turn now to the internal goals of our movements. And here I have the example of joggers only because I think of self-care as a really good metaphor, right? Just as you want to eat healthy and have enough sleep and exercise to care for yourself, to care for your body so that you can live well otherwise. So our movements need to do the self-care of having good organization in order to do our work well. So I want to think about, so what are these internal goals that we might have inside our movement, inside our organizations as we build them from the ground up? So again, just defining internal goals here, goals for the health of our movement, so our movement can achieve its wider purpose. It's the movement self-care that I was talking about. Internal goals include things like onboarding and training new volunteers. We have to figure out a way collectively, how do we welcome new volunteers into the movement, and how do we train them with the type of surveillance skills that they need, that Kim was talking about earlier? How do we coordinate surveillance teams? One of the things our little group who started this tonight, what we were talking about is what happens if there's like 50 people who all want to surveil the same kind of development site in Vaughan. How can we have that group of 50 volunteers divided into teams that then rotate? Well, if you're going to have rotating surveillance teams, you need coordination. So that's an internal goal, a function of our movement that we have to figure out, how do we do that? Another goal is public communications and media relations, right? So like one of the surveillance teams takes pictures of sudden construction on some sites. You have a larger communications team that is able to take that information, take those pictures, and disseminate it to a wider audience, do press releases as need be. Strategizing, I'm big on this. We can't just do things, we have to do things well. As Barry Schwartz puts it, it's about doing the right thing in the right way, so to speak. And we need to actively think about that. How do we be the most strategic as possible? There's a lot at stake here. And how do we move forward wisely? And finally, build community. I used the metaphor before of self-care. Movement activists that I've learned from in Detroit have talked about building community is to activist work, what self-care is to you personally, right? So just as you try to eat healthy and you try to exercise and that kind of thing, groups like ours, part of what we need to do is build relationship, build community, build trust, because that is what enables us to do this work over the long haul. That's what enables us to have the energy and the courage to do this well. Anyways, these are 5 examples of internal goals for our movement. And just like I did with the external goals, I now kind of open up the floor on the chat. What other possible internal goals might we have for our Greenbelt Guardians movement? So I listed a few already. I give you a chance just to list a few more in the chat. Sustaining hope, comprehensive data collection, managing resources, having fun, supporting farmers, right? So building alliances between other groups, helping set priorities, helping foster healthy relationships. These are great goals, thank you. Setting up communications and information systems, being responsible for diversity, like making sure there's diversity and inclusion in our movement, creating cohesion, building a framework so that other groups can learn together. These are great, thank you. Finding ways to stay respectful of each other, especially across differences. Supporting volunteers with burnout, learning new skills, learning from each other. These are great, thank you. Engaging young people, yep. Making space for First Nations leadership, yep. Legal and financial support. Well, thank you, everyone. Just to move on, I think it's clear, even before we talk about what kind of structures do we need, what kind of strategies do we need, we have needs, right? And clearly, these internal movement needs are not something that can just like magically happen. We need to figure out ways to organize it. Which gets to this last part. How do we move from these goals to structure? So again, the last 10 minutes, last 15 minutes, we've been trying to be very clear what our external goals are and what our internal goals are. And now we have to think about structure. I showed a picture of a ship before, and this metaphor that we've been using, building a ship while we're sailing. That's a little bit what we're doing because of the timelines here. And so we don't have an answer. I don't have an answer to this, but a few caveats to think about. And I apologize, this should say 4 caveats, not 3. Because the first thing is that we do need more than just surveillance. Surveillance is the heart of what we're talking about tonight. Surveillance teams are the whole kind of raison d'etre of this meeting. But clearly, from what you were just showing in the chat and what I've been talking about, there's other things that are needed. There's coordination that is needed. There's communication that is needed. There's connection with other groups that's needed. Training new volunteers. So beyond surveillance, there's other work, other functions that need to be fulfilled in order for our work to be as effective as possible. Which relates to the second caveat: form follows function. And this is why I've been trying to be really clear and trying to bring out the diversity of possible functions, possible goals that we might have as a movement, because we have to figure out where we're trying to go before we figure out how we're going to get there. And so whatever kind of organizational forms, whatever kind of structures we create, we have to be asking ourselves, what do we need to fulfill our goals here? It wouldn't make sense to create kind of an ideal organizing structure or whatever, and then find out on the ground it doesn't work. To a certain extent, we have to be adaptive as needs arise and as we anticipate them. The next caveat is sort of this paradox. We recognize that organization is really important, but we also recognize, once again, we are building the ship while sailing it. Organization is emerging. Like, organization is emerging tonight as we're in our breakout conversations. So we live in this tension between, well, we need it, but we don't have it yet. And part of this is just invite trust in each other, invite trust in the process, that the type of structures we need that aren't overly overbearing, but exactly what we need when we need it. Invite trust that these will emerge. And finally, we want to think about division of labor. And what we mean by this is that there's going to be both local groups and essentially a provincial network that's emerging tonight. So how do we think about what is the responsibility of the local groups and what is the responsibility of the provincial networks? Like, there's some things, for example, onboarding of new volunteers or coordinating the surveillance teams, that might be done best on a local level. But there are other things that are there can be provincial level kind of coordination on. Again, these haven't emerged yet, but we want to think about what that looks like. What should be done locally and what needs to be done provincially. So just some thoughts to start us off on our conversation. I'll pass the baton.